I really think, everyone's comments here are very crucial for that kind of deconstruction of the colonial influence that has been happening and still happening. And I think what Sheldon's talking about is correct as well. And, Elise brought this up in her piece, which is also in Decolonizing Mormonism as well. And her piece is called "This is the Place: Disrupting Mormon Settler Colonialism." And her assertion is basically that Mormonism is settler colonialism. It's really the embodiment and the actual enacting of settler colonialism, which is still present and alive and well. And I think that's a really bold position to take, but it's also very accurate. And my position right now is not one of trying to say that we are better than another or that we know better than anybody else due to all of this historical inaccuracies. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody has their own belief systems and everyone has their own healer, their own peace messenger, their own sort of archetypal Jesus Christ, whether it's sweet medicine or the peacemaker in Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy, or it's, Muhammad or Buddha or Jesus. It doesn't matter. People still have very deep belief systems and they still need to be respected. And I think this is the balance where we still have to figure out how to strike it very well, is being heard, meeting people halfway, and figuring out how we can try to actually be listened to and taken seriously. And that's really, it's part of the challenge of living where we do. I know Sheldon's experienced this here in rural Utah. It's difficult to get people to understand our side of it. We're expected to go to church. We're expected to go to school. We're expected to do a mission. We're expected to learn English, know all about all of the teachings that the missionaries give us, go to Sunday school, all of that. But they're never expected to come and ask us about our history, our culture, our language, our ceremonial ways. So I get when Hyrum's doing that, or, there's a whole teaching aspect to it. That's very important, but it's also extremely difficult, hard work. So this is why I'm always trying to see if other people would want to help in that effort, who are not Indigenous, but are allies, accomplices really, that want to help really get to the heart of the root of the issue, the source of the problem, and educate people, even themselves, because that's where it starts. So I'm trying to always, encourage Mormons who are already in the church, who are still followers, to push themselves, to learn about these things, to make themselves uncomfortable, and to grow from it. And then to have these conversations with other peoples in their circles, because this is important. It's good to have all of us who are native here talking to each other, but they need to have those conversations amongst themselves too.
Thank you, Angelo.
Can I add on to,
yes.
Just really quick, guys, that's a good point. I appreciate that, Angelo, about that. And I look at Christianity, it's unique in the sense that, and there's a few other religions, that the evangelicism that is attached to part of the drive of that the very nature, one of the very outwardly ways of colonization, is to convert somebody to your beliefs, where I don't think indigenous religions, if you will, that's a poor term. I know Angelo's an anthropologist. Maybe he could give us a better term on that. But I would never come to your house, John, to knock on your door and say, "Hey, let me tell you about sweet medicine. I have a message for you." And that also is part of the identity aspect of it, as well as that cosmology that goes along with it. Where actually, unfortunately, I have practiced ceremony, and my dad was practiced ceremony, and now I would consider myself an atheist or a humanist. Where I don't necessarily have any of those things. So I don't think I'm putting any hierarchy necessarily on one over another. I know there's stories, and stories do have power, as this podcast is showing. And as my as our indigenous histories have also shown. So I don't necessarily think it's about that, but I think also being able to see the human and outside of that, the paternalistic dynamic that is created within religion, especially Christianity, where the very creed of it is to go and knock on doors, which I did for 2 years. I went and knocked on somebody's door and said, "Hey man, do I have a great message for you?" And so, but juxtaposition that with indigenous religions, you don't necessarily see that with the evangelicism around it, where it might be a share, and there's a dynamic there of like, oh, this Hyrum just shared about Navajo tradition, and we could have a respectful discourse about that, like I could listen to him, he could listen to me, and we could have a great back and forth, and wow, that's the same, or that's different, and oh, that's good, like, hey, and there's a cosmology that goes with his identity with that. Likewise with Cheyenne religion, so it becomes different when you see these Western religions,
Thank you.
I think the difficulty, though, is, Sheldon's saying we need to share what we're sharing today in this podcast to those that are either Mormon or Christians. The difficulty is, especially in Mormonism, is that there is a Mormon outline. There is a story, and if you sway from that story, or if you start speaking away from what the teachings are, they shut down. They don't want to listen, and they say, you know what, you're wrong. And even with my family, I have brought up some of the things that I've learned, and they'll listen, and they're respectful, but at some point they start shutting down, and they know, okay, well, he is an apostate now, that he's gone a different route. So teaching him I'd love to be able to teach my family all the things that I've learned, but it seems like they're just a lot of Mormons are just not open to that. They're not open to it, and it came to a point, especially in my life, where my wife was either sharing stuff with me that she was seeing on websites and such, that I had to be open to it. I had to say, you know what, maybe this isn't true, what we've been taught. And that's the only way that I was able to open up and start listening to different ideas. Otherwise, what they teach in Mormon in church and Sunday school is what you're going to stick to. You're not going to be open to these different ideas.
I think we all have different goals too when it comes to sharing everything that we're sharing on here. I actually don't tell. I don't share anything of what I'm doing at all, not even a little, with my parents or my siblings. I've warned them, and then I don't include them in any of it. I don't send it to them. I don't tell them about it. And I think, for me, at least personally, the whole reason I started my website, one, was I never got a chance to truly connect with my grandma in the last years of her life, where my focus was all religion, and I carried some emotions from that. But my main goal is actually to have a place for people that, not to change believing Mormons' points of view, but to be a place for those that have left, that are indigenous or not, to have a place to feel validated, especially in the indigenous community, since that was my experience. So I don't really, I don't tell active Mormons anything about what I'm doing. I don't try to convince them of anything, because I want the same respect that I wish would have been given to indigenous people in the beginning, where their beliefs were respected and their culture was respected. So I think everything that we're all doing is especially and extremely important in putting a voice and a face and sharing our stories, where some indigenous person out there is able to connect and feel validated and anchored to some kind of guidance in, oh my gosh, I'm going through this. Am I crazy? Am I the only one experiencing this? So for me, it's not even about the active community. It is about the people that have experienced what we have, that are coming out by their own choice, And to me, I think that's pretty cool. That's where, Hyrum, your art I know, I know there's no words to it, and it's not the film that Angela does or the different things that people do, but your art, I actually watch for it. And it is something that I connect with on that journey of just rediscovering indigenous cultures, and how even though we're all from different cultures, we're all kind of connected and have this shared experience. And I want that for people in the Pacific Islands, in South America, and all through the US, because we've all had this common experience. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
I want to say something.
Your blogs do the same thing to me too as well, so thank you.
Really quick though, and I put my foot in my mouth earlier, and I apologize to everybody on the panel too, because I realized what I just said there was a place of privilege, as I don't necessarily, I'm glad Angelo, it made me reflect on that, and I know there's, just recently, let me explain what I'm trying to say. Just recently I was on Reddit, I went on ex-Mormon forum Reddit, like I was looking at that, and some of those stories are so painful, and it's easy for me to be detached and say, oh man, why can't they be true? The Hamlet, why to thine own self be true? Why can't they do that? But I know there's these structures and towns that they live in, and employment that they're connected to, and marriages that they're in, that denouncing Mormonism in very explicit ways, and not trying to engage in that form of saying, hey, a politeful form and a politeful dialogue. And I'm also sensitive to that as well. And I understand we need to build bridges in order to get everybody's learning to a higher level, my learning to a higher level, so we could have a great human discourse, And so I do want to apologize for coming hardcore there and just saying, hey man, I live in Colorado, there's not very many Mormons. I don't see Mormons at all, hardly. And so I'm not in those power structures where it would affect me in any way if I was, as opposed to if I lived in San Juan County. And to play basketball on the high school team, I had to do these things, like in order to be part of that structure in that community. Mormonism definitely was a part of that.
Well, I don't think, I personally don't think you need to apologize, because there is someone out there that's going to be going through something, and we need to have a variety of voices. Not all sound the same.
My apologies to Angelo.
I think what you say though is something that some people can connect with too in different ways, So your voice has value.
Thank you.
I love this. Let me ask you guys a few final closing questions, if it's okay. Anybody want to make a comment about the Indian placement program? We had said that we might touch on that just a little bit. Some say it was helpful, that it brought improved education and cultural opportunities to many Native Americans. Others say it was rife with abuse and with it was an example of cultural genocide, yanking people out of their homes, putting them in situations where they were taught that they were lesser. Does anybody have a comment about the legacy of the Mormon Indian placement program?
Hey, John, I'll start with that. This is kind of my Mormon legacy. My mother was 10 years old when she was baptized. She met some Mormon missionaries in Cameron, Arizona, and they were nice to her. And she, at that time, I guess they didn't have a rule where you had to have your parents sign to get baptized. They probably I think they just threw her in the water and said, you're baptized. Well, 3 years later, the option to be in a placement program came up, and she signed herself up. And she went to 5 different families, and to this day, she still has she has ties to those families, to 3 of them anyway. But she joined the placement program due to the physical and mental abuse from being raised on the reservation. It was a tough life in the 60s and 70s. Not every family was the same, and my mother had a tough time, and so there was a lot of physical, mental, and other abuses that were going on. And so the placement program for her was a good thing. It was a blessing. And so I actually was very, very happy that she had that option to go. And I think she had some good families. I don't know all the stories of the Mormon family she lived with, but she was raised more in a white tradition, a Caucasian tradition with those families. So she did lose her traditions. She wasn't able to teach me the traditional Navajo beliefs when I got to an age where she was teaching me. And the other thing she did is because she was raised in those families, she didn't teach us Navajo growing up. So that was kind of the things that we lost. And then after getting married to my father, she said she would never take us back to the reservation because she had such a hard time living there. So those were some of the things that my mother taught us, was that, you know, the harsh times of living on the reservation in the 60s, 70s, even in the 80s and 90s was really hard. So she never wanted us there. And so that's kind of the way she was raised. And like I said, the placement program was a blessing to her.
That's great. Others have a feedback about it, or opinions or perspective?
I have some stuff, but I wasn't sure if Hyrum wanted to say anything.
Yeah, Sarah, I'd be happy to hear what you have. Yeah, no, just real quick. It's a topic I go on forever. No, I have an aunt and some of the relatives that had gone to the placement program. You know, I think it was a good thing, but it was a bad thing as well. I mean, the whole cultural assimilation thing that took place. I mean, you go there, you feel the outcast. They felt, you know, the culture taken away. Just kind of, you know, they're just so on an island there, and then just feeling like, you know, foster brothers, foster sisters are kind of put above them in a sense, like they're kind of left out. I think a lot of them did feel that way, but you know, I guess some of them adjusted. And I'm you know, George P. Lee's book is awesome. I don't know if any of you guys read that, but he's got his whole experience written in that book, and it's really, really interesting how he's brought up. But you know, he somebody like him did benefit. That was one of them. He learned how to adapt to kind of the I almost said Utah white kind of, you know, culture and family and the way they talk, you know, what they believe in. You know, dinner was different, just kind of the structure in the home, and they've kind of just adapted to that, I think. But you know, I have an aunt that I visited with about this several months ago, and she was there for 7 years, 7 whole years. She is somebody who now, I mean, she's just so social. She can adapt to anybody of any culture, you know, a person of ethnicity. She's very educated, and I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, her experience with the placement program. And she said that her last family there was her favorite for whatever reason. And she had a foster sister, devoted LDS family, church on every Sunday, you know, the whole works. And she was home with her foster sister one day. They were looking through the fish for something to eat, and her and her sister found a bottle of wine in the refrigerator, and they were really shocked and taken back by that. And it turned out that this was a married couple that attended their church services, you know, temple, but then were having wine on the side probably. She mentioned that, but you know, she said it was really the coolest family that she was down there with. So yeah, I've got friends, relatives that have gone on. They've shared some of their experiences, but yeah, a lot of good but bad. I think it's probably a good thing that it's done away with now, though.
Really quick, I just tag on to that. It's hard. It goes back to that idea about positional superiority, and it's interesting that I've met probably anecdotally here, you know, like it seems like about half of every person that I've ever met that went on the placement program. Nobody in my family did. So I don't know it from the personal level. Thank you for sharing the story, Cam and Hyrum. And so I don't know it from that personal level, but it's interesting. About half people say, hey, it was a great experience. And it's really hard for me to reconcile that. There's actually a quick anecdote too, is I was on this panel one time with other Native professionals in Salt Lake City. And I better not tell you what profession this guy was, but there was a guy on the panel, and I was going to talk about some of the work I do in foster care, you know, where there is, even currently, there is disproportionality in the amount of American Indians that are removed from families. There's a ×3 disproportionality of American Indians in foster care, actually. And so I'm trying to bring some heightened awareness to this issue, and especially around that idea of the placement program, where the central idea was assimilation. It's hard for me to salvage any good where the central and the notion of positional superiority, where people will reconcile that by saying, oh, at least I got a good education. You know, I went to Timpanogos High School, I went to East High School, and without that, I would have never been able to go to University of Utah or BYU, you know, and become a doctor, lawyer, or whatever they wanted to be, you know. And so like and that's the panel as they said, what would be our advice to educator policy people, our advice of how they can make the system better and more accommodating to American Indians. And that was the response, was like, oh, you bring back the Indian placement program, which is really terrible, right? But of course, there's another half to that. And there's been lawsuits against the Mormon Church and Navajo court actually of suing the Mormon Church over the placement program and the abuse similar that happened in other religions, you know, but the abuse that's occurred in the placement program of these kids being unsupervised in strangers' homes and really terrible things occurring in those homes.
Thank you, Sheldon. Anyone else going to speak up about the Indian placement program?
Yeah, I had a few things, just
Sarah.
Because of how much I research, and I've written a little bit on it, especially the abuse that happened. I wrote an article on that, but spending a lot of times I do so much research. My original plan was to write weekly, and it's been like every 4 to 6 weeks because I'm reading such painful stuff. I have to take breaks. And the Indian placement program was interesting. There was a lot of painful stuff, but am I still connected? It froze on.
Yeah, you're here.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I even on the resource page, I attached 2 YouTube videos. One was of Mark Hubell, who is an active Mormon, and he was treated amazing. He got into a great family. So I think there are those good experiences where they're not treated as someone less. And then there's another video that talks about, you know, some people that didn't experience what he did. And we can't, at least for me, I don't put, when it comes to the families that they went to, I don't put them all in one box. There's going to be good families, there's going to be bad. But what really stood out to me with it was what Sheldon spoke about, which is the cultural assimilation. Recently, I have an article from Elizabeth Hardin-Parola. She writes for the Gallup Independent in Gallup, New Mexico. And she's covered some of the abuse cases. And there's also Connor Richards covered some of them. But I'm probably going to mutilate this name. I hope somebody can help me. Bizhinlith? Bizhinlith? Anyways, Ba, she is the last current Navajo defendant right now. Vernon was covering her abuse proceedings, and she refused to settle. Everybody else settled. And reading up on why she didn't settle, and you know, I think there's a lot to be said for moving on and being able to just be done with it to some extent, whatever extent they can be. She was the only one that refused and proceeded to get, I think she's with a different lawyer now actually, but she declined the settlement offer because this is what she says, she wants the church to apologize. So hers wasn't, they didn't apologize to anybody. And that's one of the things that is covered in the Gallup Independent, is a lot of them were very disappointed that there was no apology for the Indian placement program when it came to the cultural assimilation. So it was more than just the sex abuse part. It was the whole thing that they found abusive, and they wanted apologies. She wanted an apology as outlined in her lawsuit, and she wants it to reform its practices in reporting and dealing with abuse. And so there was a number of aspects to it. I don't have any direct quotes ready. I should have gotten them, but I know they really struggled with the cultural assimilation side of it as well in the legal proceedings, and not getting an apology for everything that happened. So there's compensation money-wise, but there's not that, you know, Christ-like a religious thing that they requested also in their lawsuit. It was part of what they requested in their lawsuit, was apologies in the emotional sense.
Feel free to send us that link, Sarah, of the lawsuit and
The 2 articles.
the outcome. We can share that in the show notes.
Yeah, I think her case is still active.
Okay.
Bren had, I'm not sure why, what happened there. I know he's got other cases and she went with someone. I don't know who her current lawyer is, but any information I have, I'll send a link to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a quick question about cultural appropriation. We think about maybe the Polynesian Cultural Center or the Lamanite generation, which was sort of like young ambassadors at BYU, but with Native Americans performing and singing and dancing. Do any of you have, when we talk about colonialism, one of the ideas or topics or issues that comes up is cultural appropriation. Do any of you have examples or, thoughts on that topic that are worth discussing real quick before we close?
Yeah, John, I really wanted to bring to the attention to folks here, if they don't already know, they probably do, that the Hill Cumorah pageant is going to be done with in 2020. Thank goodness.
Yeah, they're killing it.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with cultural appropriation?
Because for a very long time, they've been portraying Native peoples of this continent as savage, brutal, bloodthirsty people. And they've reenacted this genocide over and over again every summer, to the delight of many non-Native Mormon families who picnic and have a good time building their own relationships with each other, but not with the Native community. So I think it's a huge win in terms of cultural appropriation, and that it's finally dawned on somebody at the higher levels of the church that this is a bad thing, because you're doing real damage by taking people's stories and culture and their own representations, especially of their ancestors, and portraying them in a grossly misrepresented way. And those things, they have their roots from the beginning of this country. And a lot of people are still doing that, but they had never been so openly outward and proud in terms of an affiliation of a religious organization doing something like that. I don't know what the stance is for the Manti pageant that they have out here in Utah, but, I hope that one goes off to the wayside as well. I still can't believe that they do something like that here in the middle of Indian country, where, many of these tribes, they still do have that connection to the church, whether it be directly as members or just work with them inside and outside of their communities because they exist here. So that's a really huge thing. I think it's kind of understated. They're not really telling a whole lot of people what the changes are that they're making in the church right now. But, it's huge. As you know, John, there's a lot of stuff that they're taking out of the equation these days. The Boy Scouts, the high priesthood meetings, the Mormon Tabernacle choirs being renamed. They're not going to be reporting annual membership of statistics during General Conference anymore. These in the name of Mormons, right? They don't want to be called Mormons anymore, which is funny to me because they have a whole litany of things that have their own terminology that they use for themselves as Mormons. So I think these are kind of the moves that like a corporate entity would take. They're trying to reshape, rebrand, re-identify themselves as something different, new, interesting, kind of like what Joseph Smith wanted to do for Christianity, in an effort to retain, recruit, and keep more of its members, because they know they're losing the battle against actual logic and real history. And I think this is an interesting point that shouldn't be thrown to the wayside by Native folks, that this is actually a good thing, because then we can tell our own stories and we can tell them who we actually are.
I love it. Can you just give us a quick 1 minute description of what cultural appropriation is, and just give us a few examples for those who don't even know what the term means? One of you. Angelo?
Sure. Well, cultural appropriation is basically just having the cultural markers, identity, history, culture, language, community, all these things that indicate what oneself is, their background, their ethnicity, where they come from. And those particular forms of expressions, whether they be material or intangible, like song, prayer, ceremony, language, these things are very important as distinguishing oneself from a different group of people. Oftentimes in a dominant culture situation, those can be taken, appropriated, carved up, piecemealed out to different purposes, repurposed, recirculated, and given a different pathway for communicating different messages to other folks who do not come from that culture. So it sounds kind of benign, but it's actually very damaging. And I think people.
So give a couple examples just so people can.
I have an example.
Well, go for it, Sarah.
A couple of years ago, right before I left, the young women's group in the ward I was attending decided to have a Lamanite princess activity where they did a ceremony and they had all the girls dressed up in Native attire. I had to get up and leave. It was interesting, to say the least, and they were completely unaware of it being offensive because it was part of Mormon history. They were embracing Mormonism. They weren't trying to be rude to Native Americans. So there's just some disconnect.
Yeah. Be Navajo, be Lakota, be Apache, but on our terms, right? I mean, John brought up Polynesian Cultural Center in Hawaii. I've been there a couple of times, and I love that place. It was beautiful. I love the dances, but you can sense the Mormonism, even though it's a straight full out hula dance. You still can. This is Mormon influence. And then the living legends, kind of the same thing. Yeah, you got the palo dancers up there doing their thing. You got the hoop dancers jumping through the hoops and all that. But they still, there's a closing prayer at the end, right? And it's not. I hate to say it that way, but sure, yeah. Be in your skin tone or skin color. Be Navajo. Speak your language, but it's sorry, but it's going to have to be on our terms.
Yeah.
Two final points that are made in the book that I just wanted to highlight. One is the contrast between the amount of money the church in modern times is willing to spend on large real estate development and commercial real estate, things like the City Creek Mall, to contrast that with the lack of just basic, in some, let's just say, native territories, or lack of clean water, lack of some basic, conditions for, that would enable someone to thrive. Does anybody want to talk about that? How, frustrations with how the church uses its cash and its tithing funds relative to how it might be able to help improve the living conditions of its native members?
I think I'll comment on that because I think it's fascinating. I know somebody brought up George P. Lee earlier, and I've read a little bit about his history and his exit of Mormonism. It's been a few years, but I know there was quite a few things on the research around that. And I know this is what really upset him towards the end of his life. And I guess they started giving him restrictions on him speaking by himself before he was excommunicated as a general authority. The only American Indian general authority at the time in the history of Mormonism, but they put all these restrictions on him, and part of it was not that Mormonism was the assimilating harmful effects of Mormonism, but that I guess maybe he was coming at it from this decolonization as well, as that Mormonism needs to invest more money into these programs that were, in his perspective, doing positive things. They need to invest more money into the placement program because it was on the decline in the 80s, I understand. And so, also BYU, I know BYU started ending their outreach to American Indians and recruiting. Like my father, he went through that program or that outreach. He was part of that outreach that happened. And at one time, you look at the history, BYU that was probably the most tribal college in the whole United States. More Indians going to BYU than any other university in the whole United States. And so his issue was that Mormonism needs to invest more of these resources into promoting this blossoming as a rose dynamic of positional superiority, becoming more white, becoming executives, becoming doctors, lawyers, all those different things, and so the Mormonism should do that. But it's interesting, to quote Vine Deloria, he wrote a book and he juxtapositioned the civil rights movement with the American Indians, and there's a lot of similarities between those two, the AIM movement and the fight for sacred land, sacred spaces. But I think one of the differences between, I think, American Indian experience and then other racial groups that have been dispossessed and been able to be discriminated against in our history is that American Indians, Vine Deloria says, American Indians, our main narrative is just leave us alone. Just get away from us. We don't want any of your stuff. We just want to be left alone. We have our own cultural heritage. We have our own ceremony. We have our own, and so, but with that said, I know Mormonism is really rich, so I guess they could throw some cheese my way if they.
John, one of the things that, at least in some of the tribes down here in Arizona, could use is actually running water, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money. And some of those, I think, it's just not a priority for the corporation or the church to help in those with welfare resources in that way. But it wouldn't cost a lot of money to get some running water to some of these communities out there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we could probably have a separate podcast, somebody could, about finances. But one of the things that always stood out to me personally on the wealth of the church and the contrast is temple locations. You go out a few blocks and there's all these places that they'll put them, and there's poor people all surrounded, surrounding the lands around. And it just stood out to me. Made me think of, the story of Christ and what he said about temples, and the poor not being allowed in them. And so, I don't know that we could tie it in directly just to indigenous people here in America, North America, or just the Native Americans, but New Zealand and Hawaii and South America and in Africa, everywhere they place these temples and buildings that they put all the money into. I'd rather see it going to the people that are there. So, but that's a whole nother episode.
I think you should do that podcast, Sarah. That would be a good. Yeah. Because let's be honest, right? If they want to know what the truth is, we, the indigenous people, according to the first page in the introduction of the Book of Mormon, are going to tell them. So let's just tell them. I think
it's not something that they don't know. If you come to the teachings of Christ himself, embrace them. If that's who you represent, they want to get rid of Mormon, they want to be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, embrace those teachings about who if Christ was to come, he's not going to be hanging out with the higher ups. He's not going to be in the temple. He's going to be in all those places that none of the money went to. I'm not religious, but just embracing that story.
No, and I think that's a good point, because you globalized it. It's not just about here in the United States, but it's really about the ultimate investments of the church. What do they prioritize? Because if those don't match up with what they are proclaiming their values and belief system is, then to me that automatically says, then why should I listen to you? And I totally agree. I look around here and it's really easy. You could set up a water pipe system going across here to help my community across the canyon here in Blanding. You can set up some electricity. There are some rich Mormons here who have huge houses, and they are not inclined to help my community at all. And they can see them from where they live. They're just right there. It's really easy to install this infrastructure. Like, if you proclaim to have these teachings and embody them, why aren't you practicing them?
I think that's frustrating for some of the members too, because as a member, I remember running across people that were so giving and so compassionate. And then, of course, there's people that aren't. I think there's many active believing Mormons that would be all for, a lot of charity work. So yeah, it's a tough subject because it is a corporation. It is a business.
This kind of leads to the last point that we had before I'm going to have each of you kind of share your beliefs and practices now to close. And that's just this idea that we went from the early missionaries being sent to the Lamanite people, the Book of Mormon specifically being addressed for the Lamanites. The whole purpose of the Book of Mormon was to bring the Lamanites to Christ. That's the principal purpose of the Book of Mormon, according to its own foreword. And so you have the Lamanites playing this really prominent role in the church all the way through the 1980s. And then with the death of Spencer W. Kimball and the discovery of DNA evidence and a shifting in priorities for the church, we've gone from Lamanites being central for the church, for the Book of Mormon, for the missionary program, for the church's outreach, to disappearing. Now we don't know who the Lamanites are. Now we don't talk about them anymore. Now we don't have these programs for them. And it's like this really central part of our narrative and our purpose has just disappeared, gone down the memory hole. And now we kind of it almost seems as, we've renamed the Lamanite generation. And now it almost seems like we kind of wish the Lamanites would just disappear, because it's like that inconvenient stepchild that we don't want to acknowledge. And I'm just wondering if you guys have any final comments on, who the Lamanites are, and what it's like to have, on the one hand, you want to say, oh, it's great, this Lamanite term is false and it's a false identity, and we've been given a fake heritage and a fake culture and a fake identity for well over a century. Hooray, good riddance, be gone, Lamanite identity. You were never real to begin with. So on the one hand, you want to celebrate that. On the other hand, what do you do with the idea that this whole concept is now disappearing and the church is trying to act like it never existed? Anybody have a final thought on that? It's a little bit strange for me growing up in the 80s in the church.
I think they have to let it go quietly, because dealing with it directly challenges the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. They can't, you can't talk about it in a straightforward way without saying, oh, well, we never knew who the Lamanites were. These people aren't, even though we taught it and we sent out missionary handouts specifically, to the Navajo and to these different tribes that told them they were Lamanite, official documents. It's from the very beginning. Joseph Smith and every prophet all the way to now has at one point called people, specific people, Lamanites. And now they're saying we don't know who they are, but they don't. Yeah, they can't deal with it directly. It challenges too much.
And apologists are trying to say, well, the Book of Mormon never claims that everyone on, all throughout the continents were all Lamanites and Nephites. Maybe, the whatever populations that persisted in the Book of Mormon took place in this really small, narrow geographic area, and that their DNA got swamped and erased as they were killed off and absorbed in other peoples. That's how apologists are trying to justify these very significant problems with DNA and a lack of archaeological or geological evidence, linguistic evidence, etc. Any others want to comment on the great disappearing Lamanites?
It's funny that they're claiming that now we don't know who the Lamanites are, that there are lots of people that we were scattered. We're not of just one people, being the Hebrew people, because President Spencer W. Kimball was very adamant and testified over and over in conferences, even all over the Navajo reservation. It's in his books, his autobiographies. It's everywhere in the church, and to hear that testimony come from him so strong, that's the identity that we believe, especially in the 80s, 70s, and 80s when he was in term, or when he was in office. So that contradicts a prophet of God. If the prophet today is going to say, well, we really don't know who the Lamanite is anymore. So it just depends on the person now. I mean, for me, I don't know who a Lamanite is. It's definitely not, somebody who's of my heritage. I don't know. Again, that sounds a little bit ignorant, arrogant of me, but that's pretty much where I'm at with that term.
It's interesting. I'll jump in it as well. And I think you've had him on your podcast before, as Tom Murphy, and it's interesting to read his work. And Tom Murphy, of course, he's one of the authors that debunked this whole DNA. He exposed DNA, and it's interesting. The church was kind of behind a lot of that. They were investing a lot of money in saying, "Hey, let's find out Indian DNA," because this is going to connect them to the Middle East, to the Near East, so this is going to be really great, that let's do all this research. But Tom Murphy, of course, he wrote that. And I remember back at that time, there was an article written about him being the Mormon Galileo. And I know there's some hyperbole around that, but it's interesting. He might be the Mormon Galileo, he might've been the guy that debunked this whole, and pulled the chair out underneath Mormon identity, but it's really Lamanite identity, but it's really interesting. I remember talking to him really quick, connecting this all together. I know I'm babbling on, but I talked to him back in around the time he wrote that article. I went to Sunstone Symposium. It was in Salt Lake City. I went to Sunstone Symposium. He gave a presentation there. I went up to him afterwards and I asked him that question. I was fresh off my mission, and at the time I was probably an agnostic, actually, tell you the honest truth, fresh off my mission. I said, hey, how would you define a Lamanite? And of course, he gave me all these. He talked about I put this in my own words. I'm recounting this in my own words, but and he gave the preface that he didn't necessarily believe that Lamanites are it's part of the Book of Mormon, but it would be any indigenous person from the northern peak of Alaska all the way down to the southern peak of Argentina, all the way across the Pacific, which kind of blows my mind, because you do have traces, or you could mark where prophets of the church have said, yes, these people are Lamanites. Or at temple dedications, they say, hey, this temple in Brazil is dedicated to the Lamanites that are here. Mexico, it's Lamanites that are here. San Juan County, there was a Lamanite ward there. So, and that term would be thrown around all the time too. So it's kind of interesting to look at that and trace that. But he might be the Mormon Galileo, if that's the term.
When you ask who the Lamanite is, John, I'm a Lamanite. I was called a Lamanite all my life. I have a patriarchal blessing citing that I'm a Lamanite. And to find out that I wasn't actually was the deal breaker for me when having my faith crisis. It was so eye-opening. And one of the books that really helped me was Simon Southerton, Losing a Lost Tribe. That was amazing and so enriching. And I wish everybody could learn the facts of truly what type of either DNA or linguistic history we have, because it would change a lot of people's ideas that are still in Mormonism, whether my family or other members of the church, to know that we aren't Lamanites. We are not. There's no Lamanites out there. They're not to be found. So yeah, this whole which then debunks the whole Mormon Book of Mormon to tell the truth. So yeah, I was called a Lamanite all my life. I am not. I'm not.
And
one of my favorite things.
Go ahead, Sarah.
One of my favorite things that Simon Southerton said in his episode way back, what was it, 571? He said, the one thing that really bugs me about this is we are talking about people here. We are talking about Native Americans who have their own proud history and their own story. I believe the Mormon Church is robbing them of their real history. And that was something that I had to pause and rewind, and I listened to it 3, 4, 5 times, because I was like, yep. And so since then, I think a couple things, like, one, we need to remove the term altogether, American Indians, from the title page. Like, it needs to be gone. And 2, missionaries need to be told, don't tell people who the Lamanites are, like, embrace the fact that you don't know, at least just don't teach new people and do that same thing that's already happened to so many, because a brand new indigenous person might be taught that, having never heard it, and now we're colonizing somebody brand new. That needs stopping now. It's hard enough decolonizing people that have already experienced it, but the fact that it's still going on, that also bothers me. Missionaries need to be trained, because these are young kids that are going to look back and they're going to be held account. They're going to hold themselves accountable. I've had a number of missionaries that have expressed a lot of regret and frustration over the fact that they taught people they were Lamanites. So, and hearing Cam, I almost say throw in making sure that nobody gets that Lamanite term put in patriarchal blessings. So directly telling people who the Lamanites are, that needs to stop, and they need to just embrace not knowing, because these are real people here.
General authorities who travel down to Central and South America continue to do that as well, and I'm sure they're doing it in the Pacific Islands and elsewhere.
Others say amen to Sarah.
Yeah, Cam or Hyrum, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's not only colonizing, but it's also a sales pitch, especially to the Native American people.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think that's kind of the direction this corporation is taking in other countries. They're focusing on where their numbers are gaining in membership, because it's really a long-term investment for them to survive, right? I mean, you're going to get consistent appearances in these meetings. You're going to have people who want to activate social, financial, and cultural networks that will ultimately support them in whatever their endeavors are. And of course, they're going to try to be nice and do the things that are going to make sense to those people that they're recruiting. But in the end, I really doubt they're talking about Lamanites or indigenous peoples on the other side of the world to their new recruits. So for me, I don't consider myself Lamanite. I consider myself Diné. I'm Navajo. I'm Hopi. Those are my people. That's my heritage, my culture, my history, my ancestors. I honor them by telling people who my clans are. That's my connection to them. I don't speak just for me. I speak on behalf of them. I can't say that I represent all these other people. I'm not these other people. I'm only from these families, this community, this tribe. So for me, it's a huge responsibility by itself, that burden by itself, just to do good representation and do good work in the world. That's a lot to carry for me. You can see even right here behind me on the wall, that's my grandmother. She's been in my films. She's talked about Bears Ear. She's taught me the culture, the history, the language. And I honor her by saying who I am and speaking on behalf of my family and my culture. So that comes from myself, my own perspective. People can choose whoever they want to be. They can adopt a different identity if that's what they want. But I know who I am, and it makes sense to me.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Angelo. Let's end. I don't want to end, but it's we have hit the 3-hour mark. And I just want to say this has been so powerful, so moving, so courageous, and just a real honor to be able to hear everyone's stories and for you to be able to share such personal and very sensitive and sometimes painful and traumatic experiences and thoughts with us. If it's okay, let's go around the horn and have everybody share with us something that they believe in or something that they do to practice as they've come out of Mormonism as a Native American. We don't have time for each of you to give a full set of practices and creeds that now represent your approach to life. But I would love to end, as Sarah suggested, with just a new belief or a new practice that you have, or both, that you found a lot of strength or solace or comfort or empowerment in. And maybe Hyrum, will have you go first. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you. I actually I'm in New Mexico visiting family, so I need to take off back to Phoenix. So thank you for letting me go first. My journey certainly was a difficult one, but ended up being on the upside and very positive and a blessing to me. As most of you guys know, I'm an artist. I paint on canvas. I paint Native American history, predominantly Navajo people, portraits, figures, scenes of history, anywhere from 1885, long walk period, all the way till now, more contemporary. And I've been doing this ever since I was 21 years old. I'm 39 now. And so throughout being an artist and then being Mormon, I had to kind of stay away from I felt like I kind of had to stay away from painting, the ceremonial lifestyle of the Navajo, because it wasn't congruent or good enough with my Mormon faith. A lot of those things were kind of looked down upon by bishops and stake presidents and so forth. So I was very kind of careful what I was going to paint. But that limited me. That limited my artistic, vision, and it limited, the quality of art I was doing. And with my art as an artist, I don't necessarily feel like I speak very well, but as I paint, that's how I communicate with people, and people can feel that. A lot of artists, I think, are the same way. But but there was a point where I attended the sweat lodge, and I knew that there was just a different feeling versus being in the temple. With the way the medicine man spoke, his wisdom, his knowledge, and just kind of the whole atmosphere. And I couldn't help at the time to think of a priesthood meeting, an elders quorum, and then sitting in this tiny little sweat lodge with like 8 other Navajo men in there who called me brother, who wrapped their arms around me, saying, "Hey, we're going to pray for you, whatever you're going through." And I was going through a difficult time, at that time. And the songs that were sang, the spirit that was felt there, the heat that came from the rocks was what transformed me. It took the place of my feeling to be in the temple or partaking of the sacrament in church or priesthood meetings, because what the heat did for me and did to me was it humbled me. I complained in the beginning because it was too hot. If it's too hot, then there's something obviously wrong with me. It's not the rocks. And as we went on to end the little ceremony that we had in the sweat lodge, I was a changed person. I was totally in this new person's body. It's hard to explain, but that was what converted me away from the Mormon church and beliefs, and then into my my native tradition. And so but going back with being a painter, I knew that I had to dig into my history. I had to learn the language. I had to, knew what happened with the long walk. I had to learn of those atrocities that happened with other people. But then, we're still here. None of that was congruent with my Mormon beliefs. And so it was either or. We talked about this before. So that's kind of how I came to come out of the Mormonism. You can't do both. So now it's the sweat lodge. It's being out in nature. It's running. It's being with my children, and they've done their own research. There came a time where, I knew that they were going to ask Dad, "How come you don't go to church on Sunday anymore?" I had to be honest with them, and I told them. And a week later, my son comes up and says, "Dad, I've read this about Joseph Smith and and about polygamy. Is this true?" And it's like I gave them the opportunity to kind of do the research on their own, and they've been doing that, and they have no interest in going to church anymore. It felt bad in the beginning, but now it's like they're seeing that. But I have to be that so-called priesthood holder in my home to lead the family and exemplify what love is and truth and honesty and hard work and responsibility is. It's hard. It's hard to come out of the Mormon church because you lose a certain sense of fellowship. But yeah, I mean, it's I have a quote here that I wanted to leave with real quick. It says, "We are spiritual beings having a humanistic experience." So my God is different than what I believed in before within Mormonism. There's a Mormon God. Now there's just holy people. There's holiness in the sun and the moon. We're all about nature and being within nature and learning from the 4 and 5 elements that are out there. And to be honest, that's all I really need. And then just the good relationship with people around me. But John, we visited a lot about this before in my last podcast, and I'm trying. I'm like everybody else. I have my struggles, but I have a lot more to learn. But for right now, this is what works for me, and I have my art.
I love it.
Thank you for having me, John.
Sure, Hyrum. How does somebody check out your artwork if they want to support you and buy your art?
So yeah, you can. I have a Facebook page. Just type in the art of Hyrum Joe, and art will show up, or just Google my name, Hyrum Joe art. You'll see plenty there. I've got a couple of galleries in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then in Arizona as well. Sedona.
Excellent.
So yeah,
all right.
Just Google the name, you'll find something.
It's an honor to have you back, Hyrum Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, and everybody else.
Sheldon, what would you share with us to close?
Get off mute here. I guess my transition out, and when you're talking about my beliefs and practices now, it's been about 10 years since I've been in a Mormon church. And I think one of the privileges that I had, and I mentioned that before, and I'll call it a privilege, is that I got to hear about my identity as a Cheyenne human being, just alongside with being Mormonism. And I actually still, in some ways, I see Mormonism as its family history. I mentioned that earlier, is that my identity also is my mom's family goes all the way back to the founding of the Mormon church. They came across the plains. That's part of my identity. They founded Hooper, Utah, in Ogden, Utah, so all those areas right there that's part of my cultural heritage as well. So I do hold hands with those two things. But I practice Cheyenne ceremony, our sun dance. I talked a little bit about that earlier, and how the central tenet of that is not necessarily an invisible man in the sky. It's not built upon that. If you indulge me about that thought, the central tenet about that is our connection to the earth and connection to humanity. And I think that's a lot of the ways that I practice ceremony, if you will, now is by my connection to the earth, my connection to human beings, and trying to be a positive person and somebody that stands for humanity and connection in that way, and trying to promote that. And so that's my current ceremony now. That's what I try to do now, and connect that, and not trying to derogate anybody else's religion or beliefs or anything like that. So I feel like that's the core, at least my iteration of what Mormonism is, and also what my Cheyenne belief is those core tenets right there, is about our connection to being good stewards of the land, right? That's Mormon, right? And being a good brother, good brother to your family, and so that's part of my core tenets, and those both cross both cultures there that I was raised in. Beautiful. Thank you, Sheldon. And thanks for coming on Mormon Stories. Is there any website or project you want to plug really quick? No, nothing at all. I appreciate your work. I just promoting Indian child welfare and promoting tribal sovereignty. I guess if you want to promote anything, those are the two things that I really want to promote. So thank you. All right. Thank you, Sheldon. It's great to have you. You were a great guest today. Thank you. Thank you. Cam, you're next. What do you want to leave us with?
John, I just wanted to first thank you for giving us a voice. The Native people, I think we have a lot to say, and sometimes we don't get the chance to say it. And I appreciate everyone that's come on today. I think I've learned a lot from them. One of the things that I went through was, learning about the truth about our religion, about Mormonism, and it really affected me. But three podcasts really came to mind when I was going through that faith transition. Was John Larson with Mormon Expression, and then Infants on Thrones, and then also yours, Mormon Stories, which was really, really, really helpful. But I think at this time in my life, what my beliefs are is what 50% of you've mentioned 50% of your listeners is I'm a humanist and atheist at this point. And I also love to follow the native traditions and all the traditions that we do on the reservation with all of our traditional, whether it's the sweat lodge and or blessings or all the stuff that we do now. So that's kind of where I've ended up. Luckily, my wife and kids all came with me. We all decided to leave the church at the same time, and it was it was really, one of the things they say in the Mormon religion is that you can't be happy, truly happy, unless you are Mormon and have the gospel. And I can say, for a matter of fact, I wasn't truly happy in the Mormon church. I didn't know who I was. And now that I've found myself, I am truly happy. I'm happier than I've ever been. And I want that. I don't want to sound like a missionary, but I'd love that for everybody else. If you're happy in being a Mormon, then stay Mormon. If you're not, then it's okay to leave, and it's okay to find something else. I think I listen more now to science. I study more science. I love learning about science, whether it's our Earth, whether it's the cosmos, whether it's any type of science. I just love learning now, and something that I always, whenever I was learning something, I always had to equate it to the gospel or what the Mormon teachings were to see if that I could even learn that back when I was younger. If it didn't equate with the Mormon church, then it wasn't true. So that's something that's been nice to be able to relinquish that and to not have that hindering my prosperity, my learning. And so, but I want to thank you, John. Thank you for letting me come on here, and thank you for sharing your time with me.
It's a pleasure, Cam. I've been waiting way too long to have you on, so it's good to get you on.
It has been. Thanks.
Keep up the good work, Cam.
I am.
Sarah, you made this interview happen, and you've been on Mormon Stories multiple times. What would you like to share with us with some parting words as we thank you for making this episode possible?
Thank you for giving us all a chance to voice all this and have it be a sounding board for other people out there that might experience something similar. So it means a lot. As far as my beliefs, I also kind of identify also as a humanist and atheist. Though when people ask me, I always say I'm spiritual. That's always my go-to answer, because there's so much that I think and feel and do that all come from this place inside me of just love and wanting people to be accepted, and both Mormons and Indigenous people, and be supported. My views since, just over these past few years has been a major journey. Like, I even look back at some of the first things I wrote and I'm like, just already so different. But I think somebody mentioned running. Yeah, I think I've expressed that. I love to go running and just be in nature, and the way I view people, the way I view culture, the way I view animals, the earth, everything's just so interconnected now. So I think it's important how we treat each other, how we treat the earth, how we treat animals, how we treat other cultures, and how we treat each other in our own beliefs. Beliefs are so personal, and I think respect and honoring each individual journey is important. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Come again soon. All right, Angelo. You get to bring us to a close today. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for all your time. I know this is a busy day for you.
Yeah, it's always a busy day. But yeah, thank you, John, and thanks, Sarah, for doing this and for being supportive and encouraging. I think that really helps me. It makes me feel like I actually did something for somebody sometime. That's one of the things, being a scholar and a researcher, you want your stuff to matter. You want it to be actually used and practiced and, be useful somehow. And it makes a difference, those good words that you have for me. Thank you. And, it's a kind of a strange question too, though. I mean, thinking about when someone asks you that straight up about your practices and your beliefs, it's like, what do you want, the long version or the short version?
And it's none of our business, really.
That's exactly it. That was my next thing, is kind of none of your business.
Good. That's okay. That's a good answer. I'll take it.
And for me, it has never been more no one else's business, because the way that, I've been entrusted and working with a lot of traditional knowledge holders and leaders from our communities that especially do work around Bears Ears. That's not just from my tribe, but from the other Pueblo nations like the Hopi and the Zuni. There's a lot of the Ute folks here. and even our own Navajo practitioners, that knowledge is amazing and priceless, and deserves respect, integrity, protection. And it's really kind of amazing that I even get those opportunities to learn from them personally and to work with them intertribally. And the more I see that and I'm close to it, the higher my respect is for it. And the more that I see that we are actually extremely advanced and way more sophisticated than any Western knowledge academy or organized religion. And, nobody has to have the same opinion as I do, but I have come from many of these different places that, these folks here on our panel have been talking about. And I've come to this over the years. And I knew that deep down inside, but just the more research I do, the more looking, more digging, more examination, the more I feel secure in knowing it. The things that, my grandparents gave me, my community, my culture, I can't express how thankful I am. Because even when the whole world was telling me that it didn't matter and it was bad and it was wrong and it was incorrect, deep in my heart, I knew it wasn't, because these were people who loved me. And now it's the same thing that everyone else in the whole world is asking for. That's what they're asking for now, is to have that come back, our language, our culture, our history, our knowledge. And it is exactly what's going to help everyone in the end. And I'm super grateful to know where I come from, who my family is, what my clans are, where my home is, ancestrally, presently, and in the future. So I just think that everyone's on their own journey. They have their own struggles, but, I'm there with you. I know that you struggle and you go back and forth between your heart and your mind and your spirit all the time. And so that's difficult, but you're not alone, and it'll be okay.
I love it. I love it. Well, the book is Decolonizing Mormonism, Approaching a Post-Colonial Zion. And the essay by Angelo it's a lovely essay. It's called Porter Rockwell and Samuel the Lamanite, Fistfight in Heaven, a Mormon Navajo filmmaker's perspective. Really quick, Angelo, is there anything you want to plug? We're going to put a link to your movie, your first movie up. Anything else you want to plug?
Not really. I really want to encourage the readers here who are affiliated with you, especially John, to really access some of the things that have been written as well, including Sarah's website, Thomas Murphy, who's written, I know he was brought up, Simon Southerton. Tom and I did a piece about rejecting racism in any form. That goes to really deconstruct many of the assumptions that the church has about the kind of, decolonial and rejection work that they think that they're doing when they're really not. And so just wanting people to open their hearts and their minds. So, just don't get stuck in either of them. I really want people to, use their whole self and understand that there's many things to learn still. And we're in a time of transition. And I think this is, the more information, the more education, the better. And that's what we should have. We should know. Thank you.
And Sarah, I forgot to give you a chance to plug Lamanite Truth. It's lamanite-truth.com. Is that right?
Yep.
All right. Check that out. Essays and resources from and by and for Mormon Native Americans, post-Mormon Native Americans, and Mormons and non-Mormons. Everyone can probably learn a lot from these resources. So check them out.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks to all our listeners today for joining us. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks again to Sarah for organizing this and producing this episode. And thanks to Angelo and the other panelists for making it possible. Thanks to all our donors that keep Mormon Stories podcast alive. Thanks to all our listeners who joined us on Facebook Live. And we've got a lot of really exciting interviews coming up. So please support us if you can. Go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button at the top right. 10, 20, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, keeps this podcast alive. It's all tax deductible in the US and goes towards the foundation and keeping things running. Thanks to Cody Layton for doing our post-production, and our board of directors that keeps the train on the track, so to speak. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming up. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And please tune in again soon for another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.